Welcome to a Guide to Ninja series, the Endgame Weapon Showdown. Now, one of the most common questions I've received over these last 28 episodes is, what weapon should I be going after? Now, the answer to that question is rather complex, and truthfully, all of the endgame weapons do have their purpose. Now, the true potential of these weapons, and the job of ninja in general, is knowing when to use which, and knowing the most efficient form of dealing damage with each. Therefore, in this video, we will take an in-depth look at how each of these weapons perform in a number of damage-dealing scenarios that ninja may find themselves in so that you can see where and when each of these weapons excel. Let's first give an overview of all of the weapons that I'm about to compare in this video. The first is Gokutai, and it's the main hand weapon that you can acquire through Ambuscade, and it's the weapon that you should be using if you do not have a REMA or SU5 weapon. It will perform better than all the other katanas out there in regards to DPS, and pulls way ahead when you factor in that this is one of the best weapons in the game for magic burst damage, thanks to its best in slot boost of 217 magic damage, 16 magic attack, and 15 intelligence, as well as 40 magic accuracy to help with resistances. It also increases blade coup damage by 60%, gives you a boost of 40 ranged accuracy to help with those Daken throws, and gives you a regain effect of 35 due to Ninja's base dual wield stats. Now let's move on to Ninja's SU5 weapon, the Fudo Masamune. Now all of the Fudo's paths offer the following benefits over the other endgame weapons. First, we have the best in slot magic damage of 217 showing up once again. This time paired with even more magic accuracy with a boost of 50, and more ranged accuracy, again with a boost of 50. We also get 150 hit points and have the potential to boost our attack up to 75 as we get an extra 15 attack per shadow that we currently have up. Now in Path A, we will double the damage done 50% of the time and also get a huge boost to TP gain with a store TP effect of 25. Alternatively, Path B will give us a follow-up attack 50% of the time and give us a boost of 25 to Subtle Blow 2, allowing us to cap our Subtle Blow at its maximum cap of 75. Now lastly, I wanted to at least talk about Path C as it can be used in the main hand in tanking situations. And while it doesn't have the offensive stats that Path A or B have, it does give an impressive potential boost of as much as 70 enmity as it gives you 10 enmity per shadow that you currently have active. Sadly, the other benefits on this path of the ninjutsu recast reduction is largely wasted, as most ninja will already have capped their recast reduction anyway. Despite this lack of offensive stats in the path, the Fudo's natural stats are enough to consider this as an endgame consideration, so I will be covering it in the results we're about to discuss. Next, let's move on to the most common weapons discussed when it comes to ninja's endgame, REMAs. Let's start with the relic katana, Kikoku. Now the Kikoku has some interesting benefits. The first is that it grants the use of the weapon skill Blade Metsu, which as you will see later is one of ninja's most potent weapon skills when properly buffed. Now the weapon will also paralyze the enemy about 10% of the time, and in addition to its native 60 attack boost, its aftermath will give you a 10% boost to your attack and a 10 boost to Subtle Blow. It also will reduce your ninjutsu casting time by 20%, which sadly, similar to the Fudo Path C, will often get wasted as most ninjas already have reached the fast cast cap of 80. However, the hidden effects of this katana can help to add to its damage. The first is that it gives Blade Metsu weapon skills a 68% damage boost, and 16% of the time you will hit for triple damage with this katana on the first swing of an attack round. Next, let's head to Ninja's Empyrean weapon, Kanagi. Now the Kanagi doesn't have as many stat benefits as some of the other REMAs. The only real items of positive note are the massive agility boost of 70 that you get, which does help substantially with your blade he damage, which is good as this weapon only happens to boost your blade he damage by 10%. Its last benefit is that depending on the aftermath level currently active, you will hit for triple damage 30 to 50% of the time. Moving on now to the mythic weapon for ninja, Nagi. One of the most misunderstood and underused weapons for ninja actually has some very strong potential in some situations. First, we have to note that it gives a 40 enmity boost full time, unlike the 0 to 70 boost given by the Fudo Path C. It also augments Bijin Gaokri so that when it's used, you are granted the effect of re-raise, and when you get up, you actually have full hit points immediately. Now this katana also touts the highest magic accuracy boost of any katana at 70, which will make it much easier to land those enfeebles. It also has the hidden effect of boosting your blade Kamu damage by a total of 49.5%, and when you are under the effects of Aftermath 3, it will grant a boost of 40% double attack and 20% triple attack. This, mixed with Blade Kamu's hidden effect of giving you a 125% attack boost and the mob a 25% defense modifier, make it the ideal weapon for underbuff situations. Also note that this is an option to use in your offhand in tanking situations to take advantage of the enmity boost while using the SU5 on path C in your main hand. This brings us to the final weapon option, the Hishi Shuriken. Now the Hishi boasts the highest base weapon damage of 166. It grants a stored TP boost of 10 and a TP bonus of 500 to all of your weapon skills used, and gives a boost of 30 magic accuracy to help with ninjutsu resistances. It also will increase your blade shun damage by 10% and most importantly, unlock ultimate skill chains as well as boost your skill chain and magic burst damage by 3 to 10% with its aftermath ability. Now this katana is a skill chain beast, and due to Shun's attack boost, is also a great solution for underbuff situations. Now before moving on to DPS comparisons and the parses of these weapons, I actually wanted to cover offhand weapons as these days the list is quite short. Now in situations where you are not magic bursting, your best option is to use the Gledi Knife or Turnian Dagger +1. Now which one of these two is ahead in a given situation is entirely dependent on many things, including buffs, weapon skills being performed, and the rank of the knife, but know that they are both very close in almost all of the parses. Now in situations where you're magic bursting, the Kunomitsu is what you want to be using, and truthfully the Kunomitsu is only a few DPS behind the above daggers, and its boost to skill chain damage can easily make up for it if you are indeed skill chaining. Due to all of this, this is the weapon that I suggest all ninjas use these days in your offhand pretty much always, and focus on upgrading this katana in Odyssey as a priority. Lastly, we have to talk about the Yagru Darkblade, the most amazing tanking katana that none of us will ever have. Now in the offhand, this weapon will give your other party members within 10 feet 1 to 3 shadows depending on which Utsasumi you used. It will also give you hate generation from the casting of all of those shadows, which turns Ninja into an enmity generating machine that can easily keep up with and exceed the enmity generation capabilities of Paladin and Rune Fencer. Now if you haven't seen it, Rua did an amazing video on it on his channel as he was lucky enough to actually test one of these out, and the potential here is undeniable. Now sadly, this weapon can only be won by choosing it as the rank 1 Mog Bonanza prize, making it so few of these will ever actually get into Ninja's hands. Now since that katana isn't very attainable, I would like to suggest the Saru as a secondary offhand tanking option. It has many stats that would help a ninja if they are trying to hold hate and tank a challenging opponent, including a hit point boost of 114, a boost of 30 to defense, evasion, and magic evasion. It reduces damage taken by 8% and gives an enmity boost of 15. It is a good pairing with a Nagi or Fudo Path C in the main hand if you're trying to hold hate. Now let's start comparing these weapon options. We will start by comparing how they do on the spreadsheet, and then go into parses of these weapons in different situations to see how they compare in the real world. First, let's start with comparing these weapons when we are in a trust buffed situation. Now in this scenario, we are only accounting for the damage done during each round of attacks, otherwise known as white damage, and the damage from weapon skills. We are assuming that our trust are haste capping us and that Koru has Dia on the mob that we are fighting. We are also using squid sushi as our food and using the target of apex bats on level 136 for who it is we're going against. Now these numbers we are about to speak of are achieved when we are using the current best in slot gear for each of these weapon skill and gear combinations. Now in this situation, the Hishi Shun combination is the clear winner due to the attack boost that Shun receives. It achieves a total of 2,805 DPS. Now Nagi is only roughly 130 DPS behind it, as it also benefits from the attack boost that it's getting from its primary weapon skill of Kamu. Now the next closest weapon skill combination after Kamu is by using the Hishi, but now with the Blade 10 weapon skill. But note that this is over 500 DPS lower than using that Hishi with Shun, so this really wouldn't make sense that you'd do this. We then drop another 80 DPS to find that Kikoku, Kanagi, and both the Fudo Path A and B are all within about 50 DPS of each other in this particular situation. Note that I'm using Blade Shun here with the Fudos and Gokutai, as all other weapon skills performed worse at this stage. This means from strongest to weakest option here, we have a difference of about 30% in damage. So if we were to make any conclusions from this specific information, it would seem that in an unbuffed situation, your best bet is to use the Hishi Shun combination or the Nagi Kamu for best overall DPS. Let's now change our situation to that of having capped buffs. Here, we are expecting us to have capped haste, attack, and accuracy. We still have the Hishi as the most powerful, but now it's through the use of Blade 10, achieving 7,484 damage. The next highest numbers are now achieved through using the Kikoku, still using Blade Metsu, achieving 6,682 DPS, followed by Fudo on path B and C, using Blade 10, a little over 100 DPS lower than those. Following that up with there's the Kanagi using Blade He for 6,406 DPS. Then a 200 DPS drop to Gokutai using 10 before we then see the Fudo C and Nagi pretty much tied here for last. Now it's worth noting that if we were to use Shun on the Hishi here, it would only do 4,983 DPS, and if we were to use Kamu with Nagi, we would do even less at 3,889, showing just how important it is to switch to the other weapon skills when attack capping these two weapons and weapon skill combinations. You will also notice that now we are relying on buffs to cap us and for the majority of our DPS instead of the gear we have. And that means the difference between all of these weapon skills has now close to about 18% difference in DPS, regardless of which one of these weapons we use. So I would say the main conclusions that can be drawn from this are that Blade 10 is really going to be your go-to weapon skill in this situation, unless you have a Kanagi or Kikoku, and that the Hishi is by far what's going to produce the best results here in regards to DPS, mainly because of its TP bonus that it receives. Now if you have any of the other weapons, it looks like it's going to be relatively similar damage regardless of which one you use. I also want to make sure that it was noted that the spreadsheet does not have the ability to calculate magic weapon skill damage. So in this capped buff situation, it's possible that Blade Chi would do more damage than Blade 10, dependent upon the magic resistances of the mob you're fighting. So in these capped buff situations, always make sure you try out both Chi and 10 to see which one is going to give you the best results. Now spreadsheets are great at determining how the small differences in gear can add up to more DPS, but they only give you a small piece of the picture. They cannot take into account the things like skill chains and magic burst damage, the time it takes to engage and recast your usual buffs. It also doesn't take into account the time it takes to put up things like Aftermath 3 every few minutes and how that affects your overall DPS. To get the answers on how these weapons perform in the game, we will now head to parse results for the rest of this video. Now, before we can get into the parse results, I'd like to set up exactly how these results were gathered. Now once again, the main target of these results will be Apex bats. As to not skew the results if they don't behave as expected, I will be using only Sylvie as a trust here to haste cap myself and nothing more. And I'll be using the same Apex bat camp, engaging the bats in the exact same way and recasting shadows in the same pattern, normally in between pulls of the bats. I will be using the same offhand weapon for all of these results. The one that I recommend earlier as the overall best offhand katana for ninja, the Kunamitsu, is what I'll be using here on rank 0. Now I will not be using any food or buffs other than Yonin, which will remain up for the entire time. Now each parse was done for several million hit points and then repeated several times to confirm the results. It was actually surprisingly repeatable to a variance of about 100 DP. Now the results were surprisingly repeatable to a variance of about 50 to 100 DPS between all of the tests, and I noticed that after about a million hit points, the parse results had pretty much settled in on what they were going to be as long as you kept doing the exact same actions. Now all of the weapons are at max rank or augment level, and the only downside here is I haven't finished my Nagi yet, so the results for Nagi will be an estimation based on what we have finished. The only downside here is I haven't finished my Nagi yet, so the results for the Nagi will be an estimation based on what we have learned from the spreadsheet and the other parts results. Now, when I finish the Nagi in the coming months, I will be sure to post a follow-up video to this, seeing how close to the estimations we came. Now note that the reason these parse results don't include any full buffed results is because fully buffed results are always going to fluctuate wildly, depending on your party setup. Whether you are choosing a skill chain to do with your group, whether you have additional buffs in play, like Samurai Roll for instance, all of that is going to vary the results wildly. Now, to know how you would perform in these situations, it's best to look at the spreadsheet results that we just went over and work out a strategy with your group to achieve the most DPS you can. Now, in some uncommon circumstances, this is going to be doing a coordinated skill chain and magic burst, but more often than not, just due to the amount of damage you can do in these completely fully buffed situations, you'll probably just resort to simply unleashing your strongest weapon skill every time it's ready. However, in an uncapped situation, you can achieve wildly different results with these weapons depending on how you choose to use them, so that's what we shall focus on now with our parse results for the rest of the video. We will first be covering the DPS achieved from spamming the strongest two-step skill chain combination for each of these weapons, and then see what result is achieved. We will then move on to doing a four-step skill chain to see if that improves our overall DPS. We will then move on to adding a magic burst to our two-step skill chain, and then finish by seeing what putting it all together and doing a multi-step skill chain with dual magic burst will achieve on an unbuffed ninja. So in the situation where someone is simply trying to get the most DPS by spamming weapon skills to create a two-step skill chain, they want to ensure that those two-step weapon skills skill chain with either light or dark for the most damage. We achieved our highest numbers in the unbuffed situation on the spreadsheet by using Blade Shun, but it doesn't skill chain with itself, so we need to pair it with Blade Kamu to create a light skill chain. Additionally, Blade He can skill chain with itself. Back-to-back Blade He's will actually create a darkness skill chain. Now I'll be testing out both of these light and dark skill chains for our test to see if there's any major DPS differences between them on these Apex bats. Now in this two-step skill chain situation, our Hishi is once again on top with 3400 total DPS, largely thanks to its ability to spam the strongest weapon skill in this uncapped situation, thanks to Hishi's ability to self-skill chain with Shun. Now the next closest parse was the Kanagi, using Blade He spam to achieve 2650 DPS with darkness skill chains. You'll note though that this is 750 lower than what we achieved with the Hishi. Now, the Kanagi was very closely followed by the Kikoku, using Blade Metsu for darkness skill chains, as well as Fudo on path A and B, using either He spam for darkness skill chains, or Kamu followed by Shun for light skill chains. These were all followed by Gokutai and Fudo on path C being 200 to 300 DPS behind them. Now with those final four weapons, we got the same results regardless if we were spamming Kamu and Shun for light or He and then He for dark. In all of my tests, these two methods ended up with the same total DPS, but the He method produced slightly higher weapon skill damage, and the Kamu-Shun combo produced slightly higher skill chain damage, but it was still overall about the same DPS. So normally your best bet will be to just go with the elemental weakness of the mob, but it doesn't appear to make that much of a difference in overall sustained DPS. Now another thing that I found interesting is in my test with the Kanagi's Aftermath 3, I noticed that it didn't improve my overall DPS. I want to be clear with what I mean about this, and that is the amount of time that it would take to store that extra TP to achieve Aftermath 3 would make my overall DPS drop lower than my normal average would be. Now normally, I would end up getting back to that average of what it would normally be with my Aftermath 1-up right around the time that Aftermath 3 worn. Well, that of course means that I now need to store up 3000 TP once again to once again get Aftermath 3. That would of course once again lower my total average DPS, and it would kind of be in this cycle to where I would only ever actually get back to what my normal average would be with Aftermath 1. So unless you're actually going to start the fight with Aftermath 3 up, there wasn't actually a benefit to using Aftermath 3 with the Kanagi. So to conclude our findings here, we have a clear winner of the Hishi that is a head and shoulders above the rest. We also know that the Nagi using Kamu performs better than the other weapons in regards to damage based on our spreadsheet results. So I expect the Nagi to end up somewhere around the 3000 DPS mark, and by using the Kamu plus Shun, it should outperform the Kikoku and Kanagi by a good amount, but still fall behind the Hishi. I also want to draw attention to how Kikoku, Kanagi, and both Fudo A and B are so close in numbers, and that in this situation it really doesn't matter which of those you use. Now next, we move on to multi-step skill chains and how they can add to our total DPS. With a multi-step skill chain, we will be doing 3 skill chains every 4 weapon skills instead of 2 skill chains for every 4 weapon skills, which should increase our overall DPS. Now without the Hishi, Ninja does not have the ability to do a 4-step light skill chain, so all other weapons will have to use the strongest 4-step skill chain available of Chi, Retsu, followed by He. Now you can also substitute Blade 10 in for that first He, but it really doesn't make a difference in the overall DPS total at this stage of buffs. Now as you can see from the results to the left, this keeps the He ahead by roughly the same amount of DPS, and the overall DPS for each weapon type has increased by 5 to 700 DPS due to us adding that extra skill chain into our rotation. Now Nagi will more than likely perform a little worse in this situation than the other weapon skills, as it will not be allowed to use Kamu in its multi-step, so I would expect it to end up right around that 3400 to 3500 DPS range in this scenario. Note that if you have a Magic Burster with you, or a trust such as Shantoto 2, the DPS gap for this setup versus a 2-step skill chain will become even greater. Now let's go back to our 2-step skill chain, but now add in Ninja's dual Magic Burst. For almost all of the weapon combinations, this is where we will achieve our highest total DPS in this unbuffed situation. Now once again, we have He leading the way with a total of 4700 DPS. However, Gokatai is not far behind at 4525 DPS, showing you that similar to the full buff situation spoken of earlier, Gokatai has a solid position as a useful endgame weapon when used properly, coming in here at the second highest total that we can achieve in this unbuffed situation. Now the Gokatai is followed closely by both Fudos that have pulled ahead of the Relic, Mythic, and Empyrean weapons due to its boosted magic damage and magic accuracy. Now Kannagi is not far behind the Fudos here at 4325 DPS. And we also have the Fudo on Pass C, barely beating the Kikoku in this situation, again, thanks to its increased damage from the Magic Burst. Now I expect the Nagi to perform around 4500 DPS. Now all this being said, here we are at the full potential of what most of these weapons can achieve in an unbuffed situation. And roughly 10% in DPS separate all of them, showing once again that while there are clear leaders in this group, the difference from best to worst really isn't as far as you would think. Let's now go into one final situation, that of the multi-step skill chain with Magic Burst. After all, we gained DPS when we started using the multi-step skill chain, and again when we added in Magic Burst. So wouldn't having both together add to the most DPS? Well, to my surprise, the answer is no. In almost every situation, you are already doing so much damage with the Magic Burst in the 2-step skill chain that the multi-step isn't enough to overcome that. Now the other issue that I have found is you can only reliably dual Magic Burst a 4-step skill chain if you are using a Hishi Shuriken with Aftermath 1-up. I'm not quite sure why it is or why I've never actually noticed this before, but if you try and do a dual Magic Burst on a 4-step skill chain of Chi, Retsu, He, that second Magic Burst that you're trying to accomplish will always fall outside of that Magic Burst window. I'm not quite sure if the ultimate skill chains are increasing the Magic Burst window by a small amount or something, but I tried it many different times and altering my timing that is usually spot on for Magic Burst several times, and I just wasn't able to get this to work. So for this test, we will be doing a 3-step skill chain, which is Chi plus Retsu followed by He, and then following this with a dual Ice Magic Burst. We're going to be doing that for all of the weapons, of course, with the exception of Hishi, because Hishi is able to perform that 4-step skill chain followed by a dual Magic Burst. What this results in is the biggest difference in damage between these weapons that we've seen yet. Using this method, we were able to increase our overall DPS using the Hishi to even more than that of the 2-step skill chain with dual Magic Burst, to a total of 5,275 total DPS. Now the rest of the weapons were all grouped up again very closely, but 1,500 DPS lower than the Hishi in this experience. I fully expect the Nagi to also end up in that group that is 1,500 DPS lower as well. So after all this analysis, what final conclusions can we draw about the effectiveness and usefulness of these weapons? Well, the first and foremost thing is that the Hishi is rightfully thought of as the king of katanas, as no matter what situation you're talking about, it will lead you to your highest overall DPS if you adapt to the situation that you're in. Now that being said, with the exception of that 4-step skill chain with Magic Burst setup, none of the others are ever really far behind, so if you actually don't have the necessary group to take on getting a Hishi Shoronken, any of the others will be a strong option with similar DPS numbers. I also want to point out that the Gokutai performed very well in both Trust and Cap situations when used correctly, so keep this in mind, being that it's the easiest one of these weapons to obtain. Now the Nagi will perform very well for you in underbuff situations, with the others really coming into form when they are paired with Cap buffs. Also note that the Fudo Pass C was never too far behind the others, so don't think you are losing too much DPS when using this in a tanking situation, especially when you have Cap buffs. That's going to be it for the A Guide to Ninja series Endgame Weapons Showdown. I hope you found that helpful. Now if you enjoy this content, please be sure to click the subscribe button below this video and the bell icon next to it to be notified when my future videos are released. Also, further ninja discussions are taking place on our Discord forums, so join us there if you have interest and want to discuss things ninja further. Also, if you want to support the channel, you can do so through our Patreon page or the NEXTGames merch shop. Links to all of this can be found on the NEXTGames YouTube banner. Now lastly, if you're still watching this video at this point, I really appreciate it. Here's an outtake from one of my recording sessions for this video earlier today. Stay safe and stay healthy out there. Sadly, this weapon can only be won by choosing it as a rank 1 Mog Banana prize. Mog Banana? What the fuck is a Mog Banana?